Hey guys, tonight we drift down into a place few dare to imagine. A landscape stitched together with shadows and whispers, a kingdom where silence is not empty but alive. You feel it immediately. The soft pull at your ankles, as though unseen fingers of cool mist are tugging you toward the edge of a river that hums in tones too low for mortal ears. This is the Styx. The water doesn't ripple. It vibrates like a cosmic bass line under the world. And yes, you probably won't survive this little stroll without losing a shoe. Or, your entire mortal soul. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing whether you're hearing this with a cup of tea at sunrise or tucked under a blanket at midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge closer to the river, and the air grows heavier, not like storm clouds above, but as if the sky itself is remembering all the griefs of humankind. You sense that the Styx is less water and more memory, every oath ever sworn, every betrayal ever whispered. Ancient writers described it as a boundary line not even gods dared to cross lightly, since breaking an oath sworn on the Styx meant exile and a coma-like punishment that could last years. Historians still argue whether this terrifying consequence was more a reflection of actual ritual law or a myth designed to scare wayward kings into keeping promises. Either way, the Styx wasn't your friendly neighborhood stream. It was basically the Underworld's HR department with a really strict policy manual. The ground at your feet crunches with pale stones. They look like bone, but you reassure yourself, probably just calcium deposits. Right. You glance at the faint glow rising off the river's skin, and in that light you notice movement. Not fish, not weeds, dreams. Shapes that feel like the shadows of thoughts drift just beneath the surface, half-formed and unfinished, like the doodles you scribble in the corner of a notebook when bored. The Underworld, it turns out, has an entire ecosystem made not of plants and animals but of imagination fragments that never quite found a home. You're tempted to reach in, to swirl your fingers in the water and see what dream clings to you, but don't. One wrong touch and you'd spend the next decade half asleep, like a college freshman stuck in a lecture about agricultural tax reforms. That's the river's humor. Eternity disguised as monotony. As you walk along the Styx, you can't help but think of Sharon, the ferryman. Somewhere downstream, he's probably tapping his pole against the side of his boat, muttering about late passengers. Historically, Greek families placed coins on the eyes or mouths of their dead to pay Charon's fee. Quirky side fact. Some archaeologists have found burials with little jars instead of coins, like the family didn't have spare change, so they packed grandma with a snack instead. Whether Sharon ever accepted honey in a pot is still debated, but you imagine him rolling his eyes. Great, another barter system. Next time bring me a Starbucks gift card. The Styx isn't only a border though, it's a mirror. You lean in, and the reflection that stares back at you isn't just yours. Hades himself flickers there, not yet visible in person but present in essence. His eyes look both weary and curious, as if measuring whether you'll walk further into his domain. Behind those eyes swirl dreams he doesn't dare admit to the Olympians. Dreams of gentleness, of laughter echoing in his halls, of banquets he isn't invited to but longs to join. Already, you sense that this god of shadows is not just ruler of death but a keeper of secret longings, tucked away like the coins hidden under a corpse's tongue. A bat flutters past you, then another, their wings soft like paper fans. You hear their high-pitched clicks, an ancient sonar mapping the cavernous space, reminding you that even creatures of the dark have ways to see. You wonder if that's what Hades dreams about, seeing without being seen, walking among mortals unnoticed, sipping wine at a village feast and being mistaken for a tired traveler instead of a deity. A scholar once wrote that the underworld isn't beneath the earth but beside it, like an overlapping layer. If that's true, then right now you're not so much underground as you are out of sync, like a radio tuned slightly off station. It explains why the voices you hear around the Styx aren't fully clear. Snippets of mortal speech drift in, prayers forgotten mid-sentence, curses whispered in anger, songs left unfinished. This boundary is leaky, and Hades listens. He hears more of us than we care to imagine. And here's a thought to keep you awake tonight. The Styx is technically a goddess, not just a river. In mythology, Styx herself was an ally of Zeus during the Titanomachy, rewarded with a place of ultimate honor. That makes her, in a way, the underworld's most unshakable contract lawyer. You can't outwit her, can't bribe her, and you definitely can't ghost her texts. You begin to see why Hades respects her, maybe even envies her clarity. She doesn't dream. She doesn't hesitate. She just flows. You take a seat on a rock by the water, letting the air fill your lungs with that faint metallic tang, like the taste of pennies on your tongue. It's oddly grounding. A stray thought drifts through you. If mortals once came here, just for a glimpse, maybe they too sat in this exact spot, wondering what Hades wished for when he stared into the Styx. And maybe, just maybe, the dreams in the water aren't his or yours but everyone's. Collective sighs, collective longings, sinking down to where they can rest. Still, the deeper you peer, the more you feel drawn into those swirling shadows. One of them brushes against your gaze. An orchard in bloom, but underground, blossoms glowing faintly, petals falling into black soil. You don't understand it yet, but it pulses with meaning, like a spoiler for a later chapter of his story. For now, it lingers only as a whisper of what Hades never says out loud. A chill runs through you as the river hums louder, and you realize something startling. It's not Styx warning you off. It's welcoming you further in. And just like that, your path curves away from the edge, deeper into the dim corridors of the underworld where Hades' unspoken dreams begin to unravel. The path curves away from the Styx, and your footsteps echo against stone that seems to absorb sound more than reflect it. The further you walk, the less you feel like a visitor and the more you feel like you've been drafted into the staff schedule of the underworld. No overtime pay, no breakroom snacks. Ahead looms the shadowy silhouette of a throne, not gold, not ivory, not the glittering nonsense Zeus likes to polish his ego with, but a block of obsidian so dark it seems to drink the faint glimmers of light from your eyes. This is Hades' seat, a throne carved not for admiration but for endurance. You hesitate before it, because to stand before this throne is to realize something peculiar. Power here is quiet. It doesn't flex, it doesn't boast, it doesn't make grand speeches at banquets. Hades' rule is patient, inevitable, a tide of shadows that requires no applause. Historians still argue whether the Greeks themselves respected Hades deeply or feared him so much they avoided even saying his name. That's why you'll find him called Pluton, the giver of wealth, a softer rebrand, like when fast food chains update their logos to look less like heartburn. You stare at the throne's jagged arms, and you sense a weight in them. Not physical, but emotional, like all the centuries of unspoken complaints Hades has swallowed whole. He never sits among the Olympians at their noisy parties. He never flashes thunderbolts or sends tsunamis for attention. Instead, he sits here a monarch of silence. And maybe that silence hides fragility. A god who punishes oath-breakers but secretly wishes someone would simply promise to stay. The throne itself isn't just stone. You notice seams of mineral glimmering faintly through it. Iron, maybe bronze, or some underworld alloy that mortals have never managed to mine. Quirky detail for you. In some traditions, Hades' throne was thought to be connected to a well in Argolis. Worshippers dropped offerings in, believing they'd travel directly into his hands. Imagine that, your carefully baked loaf of bread plopping into an underground shaft, landing in a god's lap. No 5-star Yelp review, no thank you note, just silence. The scarcity of Hades' temples above ground still puzzles scholars. Was it fear, was it neglect, or maybe just practicality? After all, you can't exactly throw a cheerful harvest festival for the Lord of Shadows without it turning into a goth convention. You step closer, and the chill grows sharper. Sitting on this throne, even imagining it, you feel the pull of responsibility. Not the flashy responsibility of ruling skies or seas, but the endless caretaking of every soul that ever lived. Billions of names, billions of echoes, all flowing into this chair like tributaries into the Styx. You picture Hades leaning back here after a long day, pinching the bridge of his nose like a stressed-out office worker who just discovered his email inbox has 6,000 unread messages. Yet as you linger you notice something odd. The throne, while heavy, doesn't radiate menace. It radiates loneliness. Like a king who sits every day in a restaurant that never serves food, waiting for companions who never arrive. There's grandeur in its scale, yes, but intimacy in its emptiness. Your mind drifts to history. In some Orphic mysteries, initiates whispered of Hades not as cruel but as a god of necessary balance. Death wasn't the end but a passage, and he was more gatekeeper than villain. Still, historians argue whether these softer portrayals were widespread or limited to secret cults. Either way, the throne you stand before embodies that paradox. Terror from afar, tenderness up close. You run your hand along the obsidian surface. Feels surprisingly smooth, not rough like volcanic rock. Polished, perhaps, by centuries of restless fingers. His, or the shadows that orbit him. You imagine Hades sitting here, hands gripping the arms as he listens to Persephone's laughter in spring, knowing she'll return but wishing she didn't have to leave. Power means nothing if the one thing you want most comes and goes like a seasonal subscription plan. Then faintly you hear it, a sigh. Not yours. Not the river's. A low exhale, as if the throne itself remembers the countless dreams that Hades has never voiced. He dreams of recognition not as a tyrant, not as the boogeyman children fear, but as a necessary part of life's story. You suspect he even dreams of stepping away from the throne, just once, to sit cross-legged in a meadow, watching fireflies without them mistaking him for a walking eclipse. A torch flares nearby, illuminating carvings you hadn't seen. Shapes etched into the throne's base. Spirals, knots, faint outlines of pomegranates. Ah, the pomegranate again, Persephone's eternal breadcrumb trail. The fruit that chained her here also decorates his seat, as if even the furniture can't resist reminding him of love both won and lost. There's irony here. The god most associated with wealth, gold, gems, metals, chooses not a glittering throne but one bound to memory and restraint. Maybe because deep down he knows gold can't buy what he really wants. You feel a sudden urge to sit, just to see what it's like. But as you lower yourself toward the stone, a shiver warns you off. This isn't your seat. Mortals who dare to sit on divine thrones often find themselves stuck, cursed, or permanently fused to the furniture. Basically, you'd become the world's least glamorous paperweight. Better to stand, to observe, to respect. Still, the pull is strong because this throne whispers to anyone who nears it. Do you see me? Do you see him? The god who shoulders the inevitability you all deny until it's too late. You wonder if even his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, have ever truly looked at this throne and acknowledged what it costs. Or do they just avoid it, the way siblings sometimes avoid phone calls that will inevitably last 2 hours? The silence here is not emptiness. It's layered. Beneath the hush lies sorrow, beneath that lies longing, and beneath that lies a fragile spark. Dreams unspoken, not because they're impossible, but because admitting them might make them real. And for a god, reality is the heaviest chain of all. You take one last look at the obsidian throne, and you realize something. It isn't just a symbol of rule. It's a diary, a vessel of dreams Hades cannot speak but cannot stop feeling. And as you turn away, the echo of that sigh follows you, urging you deeper into the underworld corridors where Persephone's absence still lingers in every shadow. The halls beyond the throne stretch outward like the inside of a seashell. Spirals of shadow, chambers folding in on themselves, sound carrying in strange, distorted echoes. You walk cautiously, each step softened by fine dust that glows faintly under your feet, like crushed pearls scattered in moonlight. It takes you a moment to realize the sound you hear isn't your footsteps at all. It's the ghost of footsteps that once filled these corridors. And they don't belong to Hades. They belong to her. Persephone. Even when she is not here, she is everywhere. The walls carry her absence like perfume that lingers long after the bottle is empty. You sense her laughter tangled in the drapes of shadow, a memory caught between seasons. The halls feel like a house once vibrant with company, now stripped down to stillness. It's a strange paradox. The god of death rules the underworld, yet the air itself seems to breathe only when she is near. You pass through a long gallery lined with torches, though none are lit. The brackets are shaped like pomegranates split open, their seeds glinting faintly, as if they glow from within. You run your hand across the metal and feel warmth. Persephone's trace, maybe, a lingering echo of her presence. It reminds you of the myth mortals tell, how Hades abducted her, how he tricked her into eating the fruit that bound her here. But not all traditions are so clear-cut. Historians still argue whether Persephone was truly forced, or whether some versions of the myth frame her as a willing queen, stepping into her role as much out of choice as compulsion. You stop beneath a carved frieze depicting the famous scene. A chariot, dark horses, Persephone reaching upward as she's carried away. But look closer, and you see something the artists usually left out: her expression. It isn't terror. It isn't resignation. It's complicated. A mix of curiosity, dread, and something like recognition. As though she understood even then that the underworld wasn't just a prison but also a realm that needed her. A place where her footsteps would make flowers bloom even in shadow. Still, when she's gone, Hades' halls sag with emptiness. You can almost hear his pacing in the silence, a god wandering through chambers too vast for one soul. Think of the reality check. An immortal king of all things beneath, and yet half his life is spent waiting. Waiting for footsteps that mark the turning of seasons. Waiting for laughter that temporarily erases the echo of wailing souls. Imagine being married to someone whose job description literally includes vanishing for 6 months. It makes long-distance relationships in the mortal world look like a casual weekend commute. As you walk, you notice niches in the walls. Small alcoves with offerings left behind. A silver hairpin, a cracked terracotta figure, a handful of dried petals. Mortals must have once slipped these tokens into shrines, hoping Persephone would soften Hades' rule. Quirky tidbit. In some rural parts of ancient Greece, people whispered prayers not just to Hades but specifically to Persephone, believing she was the one who could convince him to be merciful. Kind of like writing a polite note to your teacher's spouse in hopes they'll talk them into grading more gently. The halls grow narrower, forcing you to trail your hand along cold stone. At one turn, you swear you feel warmth again, faint, fleeting, like a hand brushing yours before disappearing. You glance down, and for a heartbeat, the floor beneath you blossoms. Tiny white flowers push through cracks in the stone, glowing softly. But as quickly as they appear, they fade back into shadow. A reminder. She is both here and not here, present in memory even when absent in flesh. The silence grows heavier, and with it, you sense Hades' unspoken dreams more clearly. You realize his longing isn't just for Persephone's company but for the life she represents. Renewal, spontaneity, laughter that doesn't echo but resonates. You imagine him sitting in the empty halls, wondering what it would be like if she stayed year-round, if the underworld could be as alive as the earth above. But gods are bound by rules older than their thrones, and his dream remains a dream. You pause at a doorway framed by vines carved in stone. Beyond it lies a chamber that feels different, softer somehow. This must have been hers. The walls shimmer faintly, the air carries a scent like ripe fruit, and the ceiling is carved with constellations. You recognize Orion, the Pleiades, and then an odd detail. Constellations not normally seen from Greece, as if Persephone etched in the skies of other lands she glimpsed during her travels above. Maybe she wanted a reminder of the whole world, not just the slice she shared with Hades. On a pedestal in the center lies a bowl, half filled with pomegranate seeds. You know better than to touch them. Even looking too long feels dangerous, as though the seeds are watching you, daring you to test their pull. Scholars still debate whether the number Persephone ate was 3, 6, or some other count entirely. But the symbolism is clear. With each seed, she sank deeper into this dual existence, tied to both the living and the dead. You step back, and in that moment you realize something about Hades. His unspoken dream might not be to trap Persephone forever. Maybe it's simply to walk beside her without the world calling it theft. To love her openly, without the myths painting him as villain. to erase the abduction narrative and replace it with companionship. But myths, like hallways, tend to echo the version told loudest. The silence thickens once more, pressing against your skin like a weighted blanket. You imagine Hades wandering these halls after Persephone's departure, pausing at the bowl, at the vines, at the flowers that briefly dared to bloom. Each absence a reminder. Each reminder another seed of longing planted deep in a heart mortals rarely believe he even has. And then you hear it. Faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. A step. Not your own. They come from deeper within, where shadows coil into darker chambers. You follow, even though you know the footsteps are only memory, only echo. But to Hades, those echoes are dreams, and dreams, once planted, never truly leave. The footsteps fade into the deeper dark, and you follow, drawn by that steady rhythm as if it were a heartbeat stitched into the underworld itself. The corridors grow narrower, the ceilings lower, until you're brushing past stone that sweats with dampness. Your breath fogs in the chill, and the silence begins to take on a pulse. Thrum, 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 as though you've stepped not just into halls but into the very arteries of Hades' mind. And then you stumble upon a chamber unlike the others. No torches, no carvings, no offerings. Only chains hanging from the ceiling like wind chimes that never learn to sing. They don't bind prisoners, though. They sway gently, as if something invisible presses against them. And that's when you realize. This is where the gods' dreams are kept. Dreams bound in chains. They shimmer faintly, tethered to the links, struggling like moths caught in a jar. Some are small and flickering. Images of candlelight dinners, Persephone's laughter lingering longer than usual. Others are massive, almost too heavy for the chains. Visions of him walking above ground unnoticed. Visions of gods treating him not with fear but with brotherly warmth. Dreams of connection, of companionship, of belonging. You move closer, and the nearest dream brushes your cheek like a feather. For a heartbeat you're inside it. Persephone sitting beside him, not as a guest of 6 months but as a partner who chose to stay. They're sharing bread, nothing grand, no banquets, just bread. It's so ordinary it nearly breaks your heart. Because here's the truth. Even gods long for the kind of simplicity mortals take for granted. But then the dream shivers, as though ashamed of its own softness, and the chains tighten. You hear a metallic groan, like the dream itself is apologizing for daring to exist. You wonder, does Hades bind them or do they bind themselves? Historians still argue whether the Greeks believed gods had subconscious lives at all, or if dreams were a mortal-only affair. But in this chamber you see otherwise. Even a ruler of death cannot stop the restless flutter of desire. You touch another chain, and a dream jolts through you. This one is darker. Hades stands among mortals, cloaked, unnoticed. He watches a festival in a village, children chasing each other with lanterns, women laying out food. He reaches for a piece of fruit, an apple, and as he bites into it, the crowd freezes. One by one, faces turn toward him. Their smiles falter. Fear swallows joy. And just like that, the dream collapses. The chain rattles as if laughing cruelly. He can never have that. You almost mutter aloud. Tough crowd. The chains jingle softly as though answering you, and you feel uneasy. There's humor here, yes, but also despair. Imagine dreaming nightly of things so small. An apple, a laugh, a hand held openly, and waking each time reminded that eternity has no room for such mortal indulgences. A glint in the corner catches your eye. One dream is heavier than all the rest. You step closer and gasp. It shows Hades not in shadow but in light, standing among his brothers. Zeus claps his shoulder, Poseidon smiles, Hera even nods in respect. For a heartbeat, they treat him as equal, not as the gloomy uncle nobody invites to dinner. The dream flickers warm, then cold, then warps into something grotesque. Their laughter shifts into mockery, their hands push him back into shadow, and suddenly he's chained, mocked for daring to hope. The chain holding this dream strains so tightly it nearly snaps. You step back. Best not to touch this one. Odd historical tidbit. Some philosophers suggested that the underworld wasn't just about punishing souls but about processing the unfinished longings of mortals. Kind of like cosmic group therapy, except without couches or tissues. Standing here, you wonder if the same rule applies to gods. Hades' unspoken dreams are not evil. They're unfinished. And unfinished things ache the loudest. One chain trembles differently, catching your attention. You lean in, and for a fleeting moment, you see yourself reflected. Not in detail, just a silhouette, a wanderer moving through shadow. It's as if Hades' dream notices you. Strange thought. Maybe his unspoken wish isn't only about Persephone or Olympus. Maybe it's also about being remembered by mortals not as a monster, but as a figure with depth, with longing, with tenderness. He wants you to see him. And now you do. The chamber grows colder, and the chains sway faster, clinking softly like a warning. You sense you shouldn't linger too long. Dreams are tricky things, they can cling. One wrong move and you'll carry them back with you, whispering in your own sleep until you forget which are yours and which belong to Hades. Imagine trying to explain that to a therapist. Well, doc, my dreams aren't mine, they belong to the ruler of the underworld. You take a step back, letting the chorus of chained dreams rattle and hum around you. And you realize something unsettling. The chains aren't locked. They hang loose, as though Hades himself could release them any time. But he doesn't. Maybe he fears what would happen if his dreams escaped. Would they warp the underworld? Would they weaken him? Or maybe he knows that speaking them aloud would make him vulnerable. And vulnerability is the one thing a god of shadows cannot risk. Still, as you leave the chamber, you swear you hear a faint whisper behind you. Not the clink of chains, but a sigh. Stay. You pause, look back, but the dreams remain bound. Only silence greets you now. The corridor outside feels different. Heavier but also more intimate. As though the underworld itself knows you've glimpsed something private. Something no mortal should. You keep walking, heart steady, until the sound of distant voices draws you toward the glowing horizon of Elysium, where another layer of Hades' longing waits to unfold. The corridor brightens. Not with fire, not with torches, but with a soft golden haze that feels utterly alien compared to the dim silence you've trudged through so far. You rub your eyes, half convinced you're hallucinating. But no, this glow belongs to the fields of Elysium, that famous corner of the underworld where heroes, poets, and the most favored mortals live out eternity in peace. Or so the stories go. You step onto grass that feels warm underfoot. The air here gentle and fragrant, like springtime bottled inside an endless dream. The hum of insects, the distant song of a lyre. These are not the sounds you expected in Hades' realm. Mortals always imagined Elysium as the ultimate reward, an eternal vacation resort for the virtuous. But as you wander, you start to notice something off. The laughter of the souls is just a little too rehearsed. Their smiles stretched too long, like actors in a play who've forgotten how to drop character. Hades himself lingers at the edge of this paradise, half in shadow, half in glow. He rarely steps inside fully, and when he does, the light bends strangely around him. You see why. Elysium was never built for him. It was built for mortals. Historians still argue whether the Greeks believed all heroes truly went here, or if Elysium was more of a myth to comfort the living. But either way, the irony is sharp. The god who rules this place cannot share in its peace. You watch him stand there, silent, as warriors from Homer's epics trade stories over mead, as philosophers debate beneath olive trees, as musicians strum endless melodies. And you sense his unspoken ache. These souls are content, they've earned their rest. But what about him? He didn't choose this throne, didn't choose this endless duty. And yet, his fate comes with no reward, no Elysium. Just the endless paperwork of mortality. A group of revelers passes close to him, and though they bow respectfully, you catch the flicker of something else in their eyes. Unease. Even here, in the blissful corner of eternity, Hades is still a figure apart, the shadow you can't quite relax around. It's like when your boss shows up at an office party. Everyone laughs a little too loudly, sips their drinks a little faster, and silently prays he'll leave. Hades notices. Of course he notices. You kneel beside a stream that winds through the meadows. The water is clear, sparkling. You cup some in your hand and taste it, sweet like honey watered down with sunlight. And then you hear something unusual, a ripple of conversation not meant for you. A cluster of souls discussing him. They whisper about how the god never smiles, never joins, never rests. One soul insists Hades envies them. Another argues he cannot envy what he was never meant to have. And somewhere between their hushed voices, the truth lingers. He watches their joy because he cannot enter it fully. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient poets claimed Elysium wasn't just a meadow but an island at the edge of the world, where breezes always blew fresh and soft. If you squint hard enough, you can almost see waves rolling in the distance here, the faint smell of salt on the air. But the underworld's geography was never fixed. Every author drew it differently, which leaves scholars today still bickering. Was Elysium part of Hades' realm or apart from it? And if apart, does that mean Hades himself is exiled from paradise inside his own kingdom? You glance at him again. His shoulders are heavy. His gaze fixed not on the heroes but on the horizon. You wonder if, in his dreams, he imagines slipping into their ranks, sitting cross-legged on the grass, sharing wine and stories of his own. But what story would he tell? I once catalogued every soul in a single winter. Doesn't quite match Achilles bragging about slaying Hector. Still you can sense his dream. Not the glory, not the applause, just the simple ease of belonging. A seat at the table where laughter is not rehearsed and no one stiffens when he arrives. But the chains you saw earlier hold that dream tight, and so he lingers outside, watching but never partaking. A breeze stirs the grass, and for a fleeting moment, you think you see Persephone among the fields, her dress fluttering, her smile genuine. But when you blink, she is gone, replaced by shades locked in their scripted joy. You realize then that Elysium, perfect though it seems, is still a set piece. Its glow does not erase the shadows, it only pretends to. One soul, a young poet with ink-stained hands, catches your gaze. He leans toward you, whispering so softly the others don't hear. Do you think he ever wishes he could die? The words chill you. Because what would death mean to a god of death? Could he even imagine it? Could he long for release, the way mortals long for Elysium? Historians would never agree, of course, but standing here, the thought feels less absurd. Maybe Hades' deepest unspoken dream is not joy, not love, but an end to endlessness. The stream bubbles louder, masking the poet's whisper, and when you glance back, he has melted into the crowd. The golden glow brightens, almost too bright now, and you realize it's time to step away. You've seen enough of Elysium to know its peace is double-edged. For the souls it's bliss. For Hades, it's a reminder of what he will never have. As you turn back toward the shadows, you notice him move, just slightly. For the first time his gaze meets yours. No words, no gestures, just a shared moment, as if he knows you've glimpsed the longing he keeps hidden. And then he turns away, retreating into darkness. You follow, back toward the corridors where forgotten temples and unanswered prayers lie in ruin, waiting for you next. You leave the golden haze of Elysium behind, and descend again into the cooler corridors of the underworld. The air thickens as the warmth fades, replaced by a subtle mineral scent that hints at ancient stone and buried memories. Shadows twist in corners where light refuses to linger, and you begin to understand something you hadn't fully grasped before. Hades' kingdom is not just a place of death, it's also a museum of neglect. Forgotten temples, abandoned shrines, and crumbling altars mark the landscape above, a testament to mortals' selective memory. You trudge over a cracked mosaic floor and imagine the hands that once built these shrines, the prayers whispered into the void above. Historically, the worship of Hades was rare, often overshadowed by the Olympians who dominated public ceremonies and festivals. And yet, every neglected altar, every faded fresco, tells a story of a god who mattered enough to be feared, enough to be remembered in secret. Scholars still argue whether his obscurity reflects genuine neglect or the Greeks' deliberate choice to relegate death to the background, out of sight and out of mind. Either way, you can't help feeling the weight of it as you move through these half-forgotten corridors. Collapsed altar catches your attention. Stones lie in ruin, their carvings eroded by time, but faint outlines of offerings remain. Tiny clay figurines, fragments of painted pottery, perhaps coins or small bits of metal once left as tribute. You imagine the hands of priests, long gone, pressing these gifts into stone, murmuring prayers they probably never dared speak aloud. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, mortals left out food for Hades during harvest, reasoning that feeding him might prevent the fields from failing. No one really knew whether he appreciated bread and grain, but the act itself became a ritual, a sort of spiritual insurance policy. You step carefully past a toppled column, noticing faint inscriptions still legible along its edge. Names, dates, praises scratched in hurried scripts. They feel like the echoes of voices that survived longer than their owners, immortal in a way even Hades cannot grant mortals. There's irony here. The god of death, often imagined as cold and distant, is the only witness to the devotion that people failed to sustain above ground. And as you continue, you realize this is perhaps the truest form of intimacy, being seen even if no one speaks. You pause at a doorway framed in vine-carved stone, leading to a chamber that smells faintly of myrrh. Here, the faint flicker of torches seems to move with intention. You realize these are no longer mortals' offerings. They are memories he tends, tokens of attention paid to him long after the world moved on. And yet, they are quiet, almost apologetic in their glow. Hades, you think, might measure his existence not in fear or power but in the small, neglected acts of reverence that linger like moths in shadow. A soft breeze stirs the chamber, carrying with it whispers of the outside world. You imagine Hades listening as he often must to the world above. Festivals, arguments, laughter, grief. His temples may lie in ruin, but the world itself continues to feed him stories, even if no coin ever reaches his hands. There's a kind of bitter poetry in this, as if the neglect and attention coexist in equal measure. You move through the chamber slowly, running your fingers along the edges of broken statues. One depicts a youthful figure reaching toward the heavens, another a robed woman cradling a small bundle. The craftsmanship is exquisite, even in decay. Historians still debate whether these pieces were intended for daily worship or for secret rites performed in hidden corners. Regardless, each artifact speaks of care, attention, and a desire to connect with a god who often went unseen. In the quiet, you feel almost guilty for being alive while this god tends to ruins, listens to echoes, and dreams in chains. Yet there is also tenderness here, a strange warmth in the meticulous care with which Hades preserves the forgotten. You wonder whether the neglect above ground shapes him more than the souls he governs. Perhaps the unremembered temple is a mirror of his own solitude, a reflection of his desire to matter. A flicker of motion draws your gaze to a narrow passage lined with shadowed niches. Each niche holds a token, a coin, a flower, a carved stone. Not offerings meant for ritual but reminders. You sense that Hades walks these halls, past these shrines, acknowledging each one silently. He may not need them but he honors them. And in doing so, he keeps memory alive where the world above has failed. The chamber widens into an open hall, where dust dances in beams of faint, ghostly light. You notice a sense of order amid the ruin, a deliberate arrangement of broken statues and scattered offerings. It strikes you that Hades' loneliness is not passive. He tends it, curates it, even cherishes the fragments that remain. In a way, the neglected temples are not evidence of abandonment but of careful stewardship, a testament to a god who watches over what mortals forget. You linger a moment, letting the quiet wash over you. It is not comfortable. It is not warm. But it is real. And perhaps that is Hades' gift. A kingdom that endures not because it is celebrated, but because it is remembered quietly, even if only by him. You step forward again, deeper into the shadowed corridors, leaving the half-ruined temples behind. Their stories cling to your mind, echoes of devotion that outlast stone and mortar. And somewhere ahead, you sense the stirrings of another kind of memory, another presence. the distant, watchful voices of his brothers, waiting to remind him of rivalry, respect, and the unending balance of power. You turn the corner and the corridors stretch wider, vaulted ceilings arcing overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast. The air grows heavier here, tinged with salt and metal, the scent of distant seas. And then, faintly, you hear voices. Not the whispers of mortals, not the sighing of chains, but voices unmistakably Olympian. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades' own tone, low and steady, echo across the stone. Shadows curl along the walls as if listening too. And you realize you've stumbled into a place where even gods cannot entirely hide from one another. The echoes of sibling rivalry are unmistakable. Zeus, ever the loudest, speaks with thunder, even in conversation. Poseidon's rumble follows like waves breaking against cliffside. Hades' own voice is quieter, measured, like a stream beneath ice. You strain to hear the content. There are debates here, about justice, balance, and the management of the mortal world. Even among immortals, responsibilities are never simple, and their disagreements ripple through the underworld like tremors. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect actual Greek beliefs or literary exaggeration, but you can sense the truth in the tension. Power shared is power tested. You notice marks on the floor, deep grooves, as if chariots once traced these halls, or perhaps the gods themselves paced here for centuries. Quirky side note. Some myths suggest Hades once challenged Zeus to a contest of endurance, standing in one place for a year without shifting, just to prove that stillness can be as mighty as thunder. Scholars debate if this is metaphorical or just an overzealous poet's exaggeration, but imagining Hades standing stock still, arms folded, silently winning against Zeus, is oddly comforting. As you move closer, the dialogue of the brothers becomes clearer. Zeus is arguing about mortals and morality. Poseidon counters with floods and tempests, and Hades listens, occasionally interjecting with a word that shifts the argument entirely. You catch a subtle warmth there. Respect, even affection, threading through the debate. Rivalry, yes, but not hostility. He is acknowledged, not mocked, at least not here. You pause in a recessed alcove, and in the faint glimmer of light, you see carvings of their childhood exploits. Tales of shared adventures, of pranks and tests of strength, reminders that even gods are bound by memory and experience. The walls themselves seem to hum with family history, stories retold countless times, solidifying bonds as well as conflicts. One carving depicts a younger Hades, standing alone while his brothers wrestle lightning and waves. There's pride in his stance, yes, but also isolation. You understand then that rivalry and respect coexist in his life, inseparable and complex. He is measured, deliberate, and often underestimated. A god whose power does not demand attention, yet whose absence is felt in every shadow. You move further, tracing the carved faces with your fingertips. Even here, light bends differently around him, shadows clinging close like companions of habit. You imagine Hades listening to Zeus' proclamations, Poseidon's roars, wondering whether they ever truly understand what it means to carry eternity quietly. Quirky thought. Maybe Hades' greatest revenge is just existing calmly while the others exhaust themselves in storms and spectacles. The air stirs again, and you catch whispers of debate lingering. Are the mortals guided more by the gods' rivalry or by their own choices? Historians still argue whether Greek myths intended to depict free will or the deterministic hand of the gods. Standing here, hearing echoes of divine discourse, you feel the answer is somewhere in between. Hades' role is subtle but pivotal, unseen yet essential, a balance against chaos. A sudden flicker of movement draws your gaze upward. A shadow traces the ceiling, like wings of a bird carved into the stone, or perhaps the wings of Nemesis, reminding you that even divine interactions carry consequences. The siblings' echoes fade, replaced by a quiet resonance, a reminder of the cyclical nature of rivalry, respect, and unspoken agreements. As you step away, the echoes cling to you, wrapping around your consciousness. You realize that Hades' solitude is neither weakness nor neglect. It is defined in relation to his brothers, in the contrasts of personality, temperament, and unvoiced understanding. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a thread tugs at you, the subtle reminder that power can be silent and still, yet no less significant than thunder and waves. You leave the echoes behind and move deeper into the underworld, toward corridors that promise treasures hidden in shadow, riches mortals cannot touch, and lessons only whispered through stone and memory. The balance of siblings lingers like a heartbeat, subtle, constant, inevitable. The corridors narrow again, and a metallic tang fills the air. You turn a corner and suddenly find yourself in a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Here lie treasures that mortals rarely glimpse, veins of gold running through rock, gems glinting faintly, and strange minerals you can't name but feel in your bones. This is Hades' domain of wealth, not the shiny allure of Olympus, not the trinkets mortals covet, but a quiet, absolute abundance buried deep in the earth, beyond mortal reach. You kneel to touch a vein of iron, and the stone hums under your fingers. It's a reminder that all wealth, even divine wealth, carries weight. Historians still argue whether the Greeks conceptualized Hades as a god of wealth in the sense of abundance, or simply as the custodian of what mortals left behind. Some texts call him Pluton, the giver of riches hidden underground, a title that frames him as both generous and terrifying. Either way, it is clear. He commands a fortune that mortals rarely see or appreciate. The chamber seems infinite, the walls lined with metals and gemstones of impossible clarity. Quirky detail. In some myths, it's said that Hades' treasury contained not just gold and silver, but enchanted coins that could whisper secrets about the future to those who dared hold them. Scholars debate whether this was a metaphor for insight or simply imaginative storytelling, but you can't help imagining holding a coin and hearing your own heartbeat echoing back as prophecy. You move past mounds of gems, each one catching faint glimmers of light and splintering them into dancing sparks across the walls. You imagine the irony. A god most mortals fear and avoid is surrounded by riches they will never touch. Gold, they say, can corrupt hearts, but here in Hades' quiet presence, it does nothing but exist. Silent, inert, and patient. The chamber is silent except for the soft clink of falling crystals. You bend down and pick up a small dark stone, smooth and heavy in your palm. You wonder, does Hades touch these treasures? Or does he let them lie as part of the landscape, part of the fabric of his world, rather than objects to covet? The idea strikes you. A god so entwined with possession, yet detached from it. Even in abundance, he chooses solitude. A faint shaft of light illuminates a golden-crusted bowl, tipped over and spilling jewels that sparkle faintly before settling into shadow. You recall an odd tale. Some mortals believed Hades allowed miners and craftsmen to glimpse his treasures to inspire awe, but only if they did not covet them. Take too much, and the treasure becomes cursed. Take nothing, and the gold enriches your imagination instead. There is a lesson here. Wealth is both gift and test, visible yet unattainable. You wander further, running your hands along walls encrusted with quartz and hematite. The colors and textures are mesmerizing, yet the chamber does not invite indulgence. It is a place of reflection, where abundance reminds you of impermanence. Even Hades, with all his power, does not flaunt these riches. Mortals rarely pray to him, yet he does not demand recognition. The chamber itself feels like a metaphor, silently teaching patience and restraint. As you explore, you notice an odd glow emanating from a pile of silver coins. One seems to pulse faintly like a heartbeat. You pick it up and feel a warmth creeping through your fingers. Perhaps this is one of the enchanted coins spoken of in myths. The moment is fleeting, however. The pulse fades, the warmth disappears, and the coin is cold again. It reminds you that even in Hades' world magic exists, but it is subtle, quiet, and fleeting. Moving toward the far wall, you spot a chest half buried beneath a mound of jewels. The lid is carved with intricate symbols, some you recognize, others foreign. You press lightly on it, and it opens without a sound. Inside are small, delicate objects. A ring etched with a star, a comb of fine bone, and a tiny figurine of a mortal child. They feel personal, intimate, almost like tokens of memory rather than mere riches. Hades' wealth is not just gold and gemstones. It is the repository of stories, traces of lives, echoes of those who passed through his realm. You pause, letting the quiet settle over you. There's a paradox here that strikes you. Hades is feared, invisible to most, yet surrounded by riches both tangible and ephemeral. Mortals rarely thank him, rarely acknowledge him, yet the treasures remain, curated silently. In this chamber, wealth is not vanity. It is permanence, memory, and the silent hum of existence. With a final glance at the sparkling mounds, you step away, feeling the pulse of the chamber linger in your chest. You are aware now that treasures, like dreams, can be vast and unattainable, yet they teach without uttering a word. The corridors ahead beckon, and you follow, toward the murmuring voices of the judges, whose own verdicts echo through the underworld, quietly shaping Hades' conscience. The corridor opens into a hall that hums with quiet authority, lined with high benches and marble pillars carved with scenes of judgment and justice. You sense immediately that this is the place where the dead are assessed, where decisions about eternity are made. Shades move in silent procession, stepping forward as if on cue, each one a fragment of a life that has ended yet still seeks recognition. Hades' presence is heavy here, but not oppressive, more like gravity itself, a constant force that cannot be denied. You notice 3 figures seated on slightly raised thrones: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, the judges of the underworld, entrusted with weighing the deeds of the departed. Their faces are solemn, each etched with centuries of discernment. Historically, these judges were invoked in rituals and prayers by mortals who hoped for a fair assessment after death. Scholars still argue whether they were originally distinct entities or symbolic representations of moral conscience. Either way, their authority is palpable, even in the presence of their master. As you approach, you see the shades step forward, presenting themselves silently, hands clasped, eyes lowered. One is a soldier, hardened and scarred. Another a poet, hair still dusted with stardust from creative inspiration. A third a farmer, bent and weary from toil. Quirky detail. In some traditions, children who died before adulthood were judged separately, their verdicts often assumed as innocence, but occasionally they received curious assessments based on dreams they carried. Historians debate whether such practices were metaphorical or literal, but it paints a vivid picture of the underworld's complexity. Hades stands slightly apart from the judges, observing. His posture is calm, reserved, yet you can sense an almost imperceptible tension, a god aware of every judgment yet also aware of the limits of his own authority. He dreams, perhaps, of perfect fairness, of a system where error does not exist. And yet, he knows that imperfection is inevitable. Mortality carries its own contradictions. You watch as a shade steps forward and presents a small object, an offering, a memory, a token of life. The judges examine it carefully. The soldier's deeds weigh heavily, the poet's intentions are measured in emotion, and the farmer's work is evaluated in the sustenance it provided. The process is meticulous, almost ritualistic, yet surprisingly humane. The scale of eternity requires diligence, and here, diligence is performed with an almost tender care. Quirky aside. Some myths suggest that Hades occasionally intervened when the judge's decisions seemed too harsh or too lenient. He did so not openly but subtly, adjusting shadows or whispering guidance into the ears of his assessors. Scholars still debate the extent of divine interference, but the suggestion humanizes him. He is not only a ruler but also a steward, careful not to let imbalance go unchecked. As the proceedings continue, you notice a faint pattern emerging in the judgments. Virtue is weighed, yes, but also intention, imagination, and sometimes even whimsy. It is not a ledger of strict law. It is a tapestry of life, each thread evaluated with precision and empathy. The dead, though long past the mortal world, are still understood in full complexity. Hades' dream, you realize, is not control but comprehension, the desire to see every soul fully and fairly. A sudden hush falls over the hall as a particularly remarkable shade approaches. It is a storyteller, whose tales shaped the lives of many in the mortal realm. The judges lean forward, listening with a reverence reserved for creation itself. Even Hades inclines slightly, acknowledging the importance of art, narrative, and the intangible contributions that outlive corporeal existence. The god of death, who could be feared as unfeeling, demonstrates a subtle, profound respect for the lives and stories he oversees. You walk along the sidelines, careful to remain unseen, and marvel at the silent choreography of judgment. There is no clamor, no fear, only an almost sacred order. Yet, underlying it all, you feel Hades' unspoken longing, not for the souls themselves, not for praise, but for recognition of the delicate balance he maintains. Even in solitude, even in oversight, he desires acknowledgement, not from mortals perhaps, but from the cosmos itself. As the shades move forward, stepping into their fates, you begin to notice the dream woven through the hall, a vision of harmony, where justice is measured with both rigor and compassion. It is not a fantasy of total perfection. Perfection is impossible, but a subtle, enduring hope that his domain, feared and misunderstood, can also embody wisdom and care. In this, Hades' presence becomes less intimidating and more intimate, a reminder that even rulers of the dead dream quietly, profoundly, and with careful precision. You linger a moment, letting the rhythm of judgment wash over you. It is solemn, it is intricate, and it is unmistakably alive. And then you continue deeper into the underworld, drawn onward by corridors that promise encounters with forgotten heroes, hidden dreams, and the quieter corners of Hades' private realm, where even God's unspoken wishes take shape. Beyond the Hall of Judgment, the corridors grow narrower, twisting like roots beneath the world. The air shifts again, denser, quieter, imbued with a faint scent of minerals and something sweeter, almost floral. You realize you've entered the gardens of the underworld, a space Hades tends not for show but for memory. Here, flowers bloom that no mortal soil could sustain, colors alien yet soothing, petals that shimmer faintly as if remembering sunlight. This is where the underworld exhales. You step carefully along a path of black stone, overgrown with blooms in shades of violet, deep crimson, and silver white. Some flowers seem to lean toward you as you pass, their movement subtle yet intentional. You wonder if they are aware, or simply part of the rhythm of this secret garden. Historians still argue whether Greek myths intended the underworld as purely punitive, or if it contained elements of rest and renewal, and this garden seems to confirm the latter. Beauty can exist even among shadows. A fountain bubbles nearby, water dark but clear, reflecting the faint starlight above. Quirky detail. Some traditions say the fountain water can grant visions of the lives that were, if you dare to peer too long. You look into it and see fleeting images, mortal moments frozen, decisions, heartbreaks, triumphs, all swirling together. It is intoxicating, almost dizzying, but you resist the urge to reach in. Even God's gifts can be dangerous if claimed without respect. You notice Hades himself standing at the edge of the garden. He does not water or prune the plants like a gardener. He simply walks among them, occasionally brushing a hand against a flower, as if acknowledging its existence, its memory. You imagine him here after a long day, seeking quiet solace among flora that thrives without ceremony or audience. His dreams appear soft in this space, not chains or thrones, but simple desires, beauty, calm, and moments of peace that last longer than mortal lives. The shadows of the garden move with you, creating subtle patterns as if the underworld itself is aware of your presence. Some flowers release faint scents of pomegranate, a reminder of Persephone's influence even here. Their presence is comforting, but also bittersweet. You sense that Hades tends this garden not just for the dead, but as a living memory of his queen, a place where her seasonal absence does not erase her imprint. You pause by a tree whose branches glimmer faintly, its bark dark as obsidian, leaves shimmering faintly in hues of gold and amethyst. Scholars debate whether trees like this were mythological constructs or symbolic of the underworld's duality. Death intertwined with life, absence shadowed by presence. You reach out and feel the bark, cold yet strangely alive. A heartbeat. Or just your imagination, tricked by the quiet magic of this garden. A path opens before you, lined with small lanterns that float without flame. They illuminate carvings in the stone, depictions of mortals who once worshipped Hades, their offerings and their prayers. Quirky detail. In certain regions, mortals left tiny figurines in the hope that even unseen, Hades would notice. And notice he does. Not with grand gestures, but with subtle acknowledgement, tending their memory as one might a delicate garden. You wander deeper and notice statues scattered among the foliage, each representing a story. A soldier, a poet, a child, a parent. They are not heroes in the mortal sense but fragments of lives, preserved in art, memory, and shadow. Hades' dream here is tangible. Not power, not fear, not wealth, but the preservation of existence, the quiet attention to stories that would otherwise vanish. A gentle breeze stirs, and petals float across the pathway. You almost step on one and pause. These are delicate reminders that even in death, moments of beauty persist. Perhaps this is the ultimate care of Hades. He may govern the dead, yet he nurtures memory, creates space for renewal, and holds fragments of the living in a quiet, eternal garden. The farther you walk, the softer the light grows, until it is almost like walking in twilight above ground. You realize that this garden is not just a place but a living metaphor. Hades' dreams made tangible. Dreams of care, of presence, of quiet understanding that no mortal worship or fear could fully acknowledge. As you continue along the winding paths, the distant echo of Persephone's laughter seems to mingle with the whisper of leaves. Hades is present but absent, a god whose dreams are carried not in chains or coins, but in petals, in blossoms that glow faintly, in the quiet acknowledgement of life and memory intertwined. The garden gradually gives way to a shadowed cavern, the air cooler now, carrying a damp earthen scent that reminds you of caves after rainfall. Here, the underworld's whispers grow more insistent, as though the very stones are speaking. The chamber stretches wide, lined with niches that hold urns and boxes, each one a repository of mortal memories. Hades moves among them silently, hands gliding over lids, tracing carvings, acknowledging each life with meticulous care. You step closer, noticing the delicate inscriptions etched into the stone. Names, dates, deeds, perhaps even secrets left unspoken. Scholars still argue whether urns in the underworld were symbolic of remembrance or a literal part of myth, but standing here, you feel the significance. Each container seems to pulse faintly, as if the memories inside are alive, waiting for acknowledgement. Quirky tidbit. In some accounts, mortals left offerings for Hades in urns so that he might care for the souls of their ancestors, a precursor to the modern notion of grave visits, but with divine oversight. Hades pauses at a particularly ornate urn. You notice a subtle shift in his expression, a softening rarely glimpsed elsewhere. Perhaps it belongs to a poet, judging by the finely carved tools of writing along the surface. He runs his fingers across it, not as ruler but as custodian. Here power is quiet. It doesn't roar. It listens. You imagine that even he finds solace in these moments, tracing the contours of lives carefully preserved, honoring the stories that the world above has forgotten. The chamber is filled with faint echoes, not of conversation, but of memory itself. Some are happy, some sorrowful, some mundane yet vital. You realize that this is another of Hades' unspoken dreams. To witness fully, without interference, the entirety of mortal existence, not just the dramatic or heroic, but the small, fragile details that define a life. Historians debate whether such concepts were meant to illustrate divine omniscience or moral guidance, but here the intent is unmistakable. You wander past urns depicting warriors, lovers, and artisans. Each seems to whisper fragments of story. You catch a fleeting smile from one spirit, a tear frozen in stone from another. The effect is hypnotic, almost hypnotizing enough that you forget to breathe. Quirky aside. Some myths suggest that Hades' attendants, spectral figures that rarely appear to mortals, assist in cataloging these memories, ensuring that none are lost. Scholars argue endlessly about whether these beings are metaphors or literal participants in myth, but in the hushed chamber, you can almost sense them moving unseen. A sudden shift in the shadows draws your gaze upward. Light glimmers faintly, revealing carvings of Hades himself, rare images often ignored by mortal artists. He is depicted not as fearsome, but as attentive, moving among urns and memories with care. You sense that his unspoken dream is recognition, not adoration, to be seen as a keeper, not as a monster. The juxtaposition is poignant. He governs death, yet is defined not by power or terror, but by quiet stewardship. You reach for an urn carved with pomegranate motifs, its surface slightly warm, almost pulsing with faint life. As you touch it, the memory within unfurls briefly. Persephone laughing, sunlight dappling her hair, a fleeting conversation in a garden above the world. You feel Hades longing in that moment, not merely for companionship, but for the continuity of memory, the persistence of presence beyond physical absence. As you continue to explore, you notice that some urns are grouped in patterns, suggesting a narrative sequence. Lives are connected, echoes of relationships preserved not as random fragments, but as stories intentionally curated. Hades' care is evident. The underworld is not a place of chaos, but of meticulous order, a realm where nothing, joy, grief, or simple human idiosyncrasy, is lost entirely. The chamber stretches endlessly, yet the feeling of intimacy is remarkable. You realize that Hades' unspoken dream may be larger than any single desire. To hold every story, to observe every life, to preserve the fleeting details that matter. His domain is both vast and personal, and here, in this quiet cavern of memories, the weight of eternity is not oppressive but profound. You step back to take in the full scope. Urns glimmer faintly, shadows twist like fingers over stone, and the air hums softly with remembrance. Even without mortals' attention, Hades tends the repository of life and death, weaving order from memory. And in this quiet, intricate labor, you understand his dream, to be witness, caretaker, and silent guardian, ensuring that nothing truly disappears, even as centuries pass. The urn chamber fades behind you as the corridor twists downward. Colder now, dampness pressing against your skin. You sense a shift in the underworld's energy, the quiet intimacy of memory replaced by something heavier, older. This is the realm of punishment, the place where mortal choices meet consequence, where deeds unexamined in life are weighed in eternity. Yet even here, the environment is deliberate, not chaos for spectacle, but order for reflection. You trudge along a stone path lined with shallow pits, each containing faint, flickering silhouettes. Some twist in anguish, others pace slowly, resigned to their condition. Scholars still debate whether Tartarus was originally a poetic exaggeration or a literal underworld feature in Greek belief. But standing here, the sensation of looming depth is undeniable. Quirky tidbit. Certain myths claim that some of the condemned were there not for evil, but for failing to honor promises or oaths, a reminder that ethics, rather than malice, shaped punishment. Hades is nowhere in sight, yet his presence pervades. The air seems to tremble with his attention, deliberate and impartial. You realize that even the punishments are an extension of his unspoken dreams. The desire for balance, for the acknowledgement of responsibility, for the universe to feel coherent. It is not cruelty that defines him, but meticulous oversight. A pit in particular draws your gaze. Shadows twist to form a circle, a pattern suggesting movement that is more symbolic than physical. Inside, a soul writhes endlessly, yet the pattern itself feels purposeful, like a lesson encoded in motion. You lean closer, and for a brief moment, it feels less like torment and more like a puzzle, a challenge posed by existence itself. Historians argue endlessly about whether Greek concepts of afterlife punishment were moralistic allegories or feared realities, but you sense the tension between pedagogy and fate here is tangible. As you continue, the walls become jagged, veins of minerals glinting faintly in the sparse light. A soft, almost musical vibration resonates through the rock. You glance upward and notice the faint traces of Hades' intervention. Chains, pulleys, and mechanisms guiding souls gently, preventing collapse, maintaining order. Even in what mortals call suffering, he intervenes with precision, ensuring consequences are measured rather than chaotic. Quirky aside. Some myths suggest Hades employed spectral assistants who adjusted punishments, fine-tuning them like a master craftsman adjusting an intricate clock. Whether metaphor or myth, the idea humanizes a god often imagined as merciless. Even in judgment there is care. You pause beside a shadow that pulses differently from the rest. Its suffering is quiet, almost contemplative. You sense it is not eternal anguish but reflection, a chance to reckon with choices and understand their ripple through time. Perhaps this is Hades' true dream, a system where learning, acknowledgement, and consequence coexist, even when mortals can no longer act. The corridor narrows again, guiding you past these pits of reflection. The air grows colder still, pressing against your lungs, and you shiver, aware that you are walking along the thin line between memory and consequence, between quiet oversight and the heavier weight of eternal responsibility. Hades' presence is subtle here, almost invisible, yet his control is absolute. No pit too deep, no shadow neglected, no detail too small to escape his notice. You glance back, and for a fleeting moment, the shadows seem to bow, acknowledging your passage. Perhaps this is Hades' lesson encoded in space itself. Even in judgment, there is a rhythm, a balance, a fairness that does not require spectacle. His unspoken dream continues to unfold, not in grandeur, but in precise, quiet management of the lives he touches indirectly, the choices he evaluates, and the stories he ensures are neither forgotten nor ignored. The path leads you deeper into the shadows, toward chambers where the boundaries of morality, memory, and consequence blur. You feel a subtle shift in the air, a whisper of something more personal, a trace of longing that transcends punishment. Somewhere ahead, Hades' private dreams await, the quiet desires and intimate regrets that mortals rarely glimpse, but which shape the very fabric of his kingdom. The shadows recede slightly as you move into a chamber lit by a faint, otherworldly glow. The light comes not from fire or torch, but from an unseen source, casting the walls in gentle gradients of color that shift with every step. You realize you've entered a space reserved for reflection, not punishment, a place where even Hades himself seems to meditate on the balance he maintains. It feels almost alive, like a lung expanding and contracting in rhythm with your own breath. You notice faint outlines along the walls, murals depicting scenes not of mortal life, but of gods interacting in subtle, intimate ways. Hades appears among them frequently, often in quiet poses, listening, observing, rarely acting. Historically, depictions of Hades focused on him as grim and distant, yet these murals suggest a more contemplative aspect, a god aware of relationships, of nuance, of moments that do not require spectacle. Scholars still debate whether these subtle portrayals were widespread or merely literary embellishment, but their existence here feels undeniable. A faint vibration underfoot draws your attention. The floor, carved with intricate patterns, hums softly, almost like the heartbeat of the underworld itself. Quirky tidbit. Some myths suggest the earth beneath Hades' palace resonated with the emotions of the dead, transmitting echoes of their joys and sorrows. You feel it as a low, persistent thrum, a gentle reminder that even in solitude, Hades is never truly alone. You move closer to a wall that shimmers with an almost liquid quality. As you run your hand across it, you see fleeting images. A banquet with Persephone, laughter shared quietly among mortals, shadows of gods speaking without conflict. They are glimpses of his unspoken dreams, moments of connection, recognition, and fleeting contentment. You sense that these visions exist only because he allows them, preserves them, in a way that balances desire with restraint. A faint whisper seems to emanate from the murals themselves. It is neither mortal nor divine, but a trace of memory, a suggestion of longing. You catch fragments of conversations. Do they remember me? Will they ever understand? Is solitude my punishment or my choice? Quirky aside. Some ancient commentators suggested that Hades' contemplations here inspired mortals to create philosophical texts on life, death, and justice, though they rarely connected it directly to him. Whether true or metaphorical, the idea reinforces the god's subtle influence. You step to a central platform, where light pools softly around a sculpted seat carved from obsidian. Hades is here, sitting, hands folded, eyes closed, yet fully aware of everything around him. His breath is steady, his posture calm. You feel an odd warmth in witnessing this moment. Even the god of shadows seeks pause, reflection, and personal understanding. It's a side of him rarely described in myths, yet undeniably real in the cadence of this place. The murals shimmer again, showing Hades interacting with mortals in ways subtle but profound. A nod to a grieving widow, a faint glow over a sleeping child, a gentle ripple in the water of a river carrying a departed soul. These gestures are small, almost imperceptible, but they reveal an unspoken compassion. His dreams, you realize, are not grandiose or power-driven. They are intimate, personal, and largely invisible to the mortal eye. A corridor branches from this chamber, narrower and darker, lined with faintly glowing stones that pulse with a rhythm akin to breathing. You notice inscriptions along the walls, phrases that appear to shift as you read them, reflecting the duality of desire and restraint. They speak of longing, of the weight of duty, and of the quiet satisfaction in carrying responsibility without recognition. Historians still argue whether such inscriptions were literal or symbolic, but the effect is profound. They convey Hades' inner life with startling clarity. You pause to touch one stone, and the glow brightens slightly, almost acknowledging your presence. It's a subtle interaction, intimate, reminding you that even in silence, Hades is attuned to the world around him. He governs the dead, maintains balance, and tends memory, all without fanfare or visible reward. And yet, in this quiet chamber, you feel the essence of his unspoken dreams, a desire for understanding, for moments of recognition, and for peace within the endless responsibilities of eternity. You leave the reflective chamber slowly, stepping back into the twisting corridors. The soft glow lingers in your vision, a reminder that Hades' dominion is as much about quiet observation and subtle care as it is about shadow and power. His dreams are stitched into every corner of the underworld, from urns to gardens to murals, a lattice of longing that hums softly beneath the surface. And as you continue forward, you realize that each corridor is more than a passage. It is a reflection of a god who dreams carefully, quietly, profoundly, in ways few mortals ever glimpse. The corridors grow quieter still as you descend, walls narrowing, shadows deepening. The air here carries a subtle sweetness, a hint of pomegranate and damp stone, reminiscent of Persephone's presence even when she is absent. You realize you've entered a space where dreams linger, not the dreams of mortals, but the unspoken reveries of Hades himself. Fragments of desires he has never voiced, glimpses into the private corners of a god who rarely leaves his shadowed throne. You trudge along a path of polished stone, edges etched with faint, indecipherable symbols. These carvings pulse faintly, as if alive, vibrating in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. Quirky tidbit. Certain myths suggest that Hades could sculpt reality subtly with these stones, altering the underworld's layout to mirror the ebb and flow of mortal memory. Historians still debate whether this was metaphorical or literal, but the effect is tangible. The corridors themselves feel alive, responsive to thought and attention. As you move forward, the space opens into a hall of mirrors, though the reflections are not quite accurate. You see yourself, yes, but also moments from the lives of souls who have passed through these realms. A warrior raising a sword, a mother cradling her child, a poet pausing mid-verse. Each reflection shifts subtly, intertwining memory and reality, the living and the departed. You realize the mirrors are not mere glass but manifestations of Hades' unspoken dream, to witness, remember, and preserve the essence of life in a form that defies mortality. Hades stands at the far end of the hall, still, silent, yet fully aware of your presence. His gaze passes through the mirrors without distortion, seeing not just reflections, but the weight of time, the delicate balance of stories, and the subtle interconnection of all existence. Historically, he was often portrayed as a distant, fearsome figure, but here, he embodies attentiveness and stewardship, a god whose power is measured not in spectacle, but in careful observation. You notice faint trails of light drifting along the floor, leading toward a cluster of mirrors where images shift more vividly. You step closer and see scenes from his own memories, moments with Persephone, exchanges with Zeus and Poseidon, even quiet instances of solitude spent among treasures and urns. Quirky aside. Some myths claim Hades' reflections could whisper guidance or warnings to mortals who glimpsed them, though scholars debate whether this was ever taken literally. Nevertheless, standing here, the whispers feel real, subtle, almost comforting. The hall resonates with a low hum, a vibration that seems to come from both the mirrors and the god himself. You feel it deep in your chest like the pulse of eternity, and you realize this is not mere display. Each reflection, each flicker of light, is a carefully curated dream, a lattice of memory and intention. Hades' unspoken desire is clear. He does not simply rule the dead. He maintains continuity, honor, and care across realms. As you wander further, the reflections shift to reveal fleeting glimpses of future possibilities, paths mortals might take, echoes of lives yet imagined. It is not prophecy in the traditional sense, but a subtle awareness of potential. His dream seems almost paternal, a wish to guide without interference, to honor freedom while preserving order. You feel a quiet awe. The god of shadows here is a silent architect of memory and possibility. You pause to touch one mirror. Your hand meets cool glass, yet warmth spreads through your arm as images ripple, reshaping around your presence. You sense Hades' attention, not intrusive, not demanding, but quietly cognizant. His dreams, you realize, are as much about connection as they are about solitude. He seeks acknowledgement, understanding, and the preservation of life's fleeting intricacies. As you step back, the hall seems to expand, the mirrors stretching toward infinity. You glimpse yourself one final time, not just as a traveler, but as a witness to Hades' world, his dreams and his quiet, enduring guardianship. And with a soft exhale, you continue forward, deeper into the corridors, toward the private, tender spaces where even God's desires are most human, and where Hades' unspoken dreams unfold like a secret garden of light and shadow. The corridors finally open into a vast, hushed chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, walls lined with obsidian columns that shimmer faintly as if alive. The air feels softer here, carrying a faint aroma of earth and faint sunlight that seems borrowed from the world above. You realize you've entered Hades' most private space, the repository of unspoken dreams, the corner of the underworld even Persephone rarely glimpses. Here, the god of shadows is fully himself, unobserved, unmeasured by mortals or Olympians. You move slowly along a pathway of polished stone, careful to let silence dominate. The chamber seems endless, yet intimate, each column reflecting faint images of memories, treasures, gardens, and corridors you have traversed. Quirky detail. Ancient texts suggest Hades once carved tiny secret rooms within such chambers, each containing miniature worlds of memory, some so delicate a mortal's breath might erase them. Scholars still argue whether these claims were myth or metaphor, but the atmosphere here makes such wonders feel plausible. In the center of the chamber, Hades sits on a throne carved of deep black stone, unadorned yet commanding. He does not beckon, does not speak. He simply observes. You notice subtle movements, a flicker of light along a column, the ripple of shadows on the floor, as if the underworld itself bends to his quiet attention. Historically, he has been depicted as stern and unyielding, yet here his demeanor is reflective, almost tender, a god who measures eternity not with fear, but with watchfulness. You pause near a low pool of water, its surface dark and glassy, reflecting the faint shimmer of columns and distant lights. You see your reflection and, alongside it, fragments of Hades' inner life, moments of longing, quiet joy, and subtle connection. It strikes you that his dreams are not about dominion, power, or spectacle. They are the delicate, intimate experiences that rarely reach mortal perception. Shared smiles with Persephone, the glow of treasures untouched, whispers of memory preserved. A faint wind stirs through the chamber, rustling the shadows and carrying whispers you cannot fully hear. You sense echoes of past corridors, gardens, urns, mirrors, judgments, all woven into a single continuous tapestry. Hades' dream is expansive yet personal. The underworld is a living archive of life, death, and memory, curated with precision, patience, and care. Quirky aside, some myths hint that even gods occasionally slip into this chamber in dreams, seeking counsel or solace, though evidence is fragmentary and debated. Nevertheless, you feel the weight of presence here, deep and enduring. You move closer to Hades, noticing how the shadows bend subtly around him. They do not obscure him, they accompany him. His eyes, faintly glimmering in the dark, meet yours for a moment, and you feel a silent acknowledgement, as if he recognizes you as a witness to his domain and his unspoken dreams. This acknowledgement carries no judgment, only presence. You trace your fingers along the edges of the obsidian columns, feeling the faint pulse of energy that resonates with the god himself. This pulse is subtle, imperceptible to mortals above, yet it embodies continuity, care, and the quiet rhythm of existence. His dream is woven into every stone, every reflection, every garden, every judgment, to preserve, to observe, and to nurture the essence of life and memory without fanfare. As you move toward the chamber's exit, the shadows stretch behind you, elongating like echoes of your journey. You look back one last time, glimpsing Hades seated among the columns, the quiet custodian of eternity. There is a softness there, a vulnerability rarely acknowledged. The god of death who dreams of intimacy, understanding, and the delicate continuity of existence. You step into the corridor beyond, carrying the weight of what you have seen, a kingdom of shadows, treasures, judgments, gardens, reflections, and dreams. And as you walk, you realize that Hades' unspoken desires are not merely fantastical, they are profoundly human. Even gods, you understand, dream quietly, tend to what matters, and hope for moments of recognition and care. The underworld hums gently around you, a living, breathing entity shaped by its ruler's attentiveness. And you know that, somewhere in the shadows, Hades continues to dream, patient, silent, and eternal, a god whose kingdom is defined not by fear, but by the subtle, enduring preservation of memory and life itself. The corridors begin to fade softly around you as your steps slow, the echoes of chambers, gardens, and mirrors lingering faintly in your mind. You feel the quiet pulse of the underworld, a rhythm that is patient, steady, and calm. Hades' presence, once imposing, now seems gentle, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows there is care, attentiveness, and subtle beauty. Each memory, each reflection, each tiny gesture of stewardship creates a tapestry that stretches endlessly, yet remains intimate. As you breathe slowly, the weight of eternity eases, and you notice the faint fragrance of pomegranate and flowers, a hint of sunlight captured in shadow. Even in the underworld, there is room for beauty, for quiet connection, and for moments that touch the heart. You realize that Hades' dreams, though unspoken and solitary, are not lonely. They are full of life, of stories preserved, and of delicate attention paid to every soul that passes through his domain. Let your mind drift gently through these corridors now. Picture the urns and treasures, the gardens and mirrors, the soft hum of judgment and the subtle pulse of shadows. Imagine the quiet care of a god who observes without interference, nurtures without fanfare, and dreams patiently in silence. Feel the rhythm of the underworld as a calm, steady heartbeat beneath your own, soothing, persistent, eternal. Now, as the shadows soften and the corridors recede completely from your mind, let the gentle presence of Hades' dreams lull you further. The underworld, vast yet intimate, carries you through memory, reflection, and quiet wonder. Allow yourself to rest, to drift, to release tension, and to feel the subtle warmth of a god who dreams not of power, but of care. Let your breath slow, your mind soften, and your body sink into comfort. The underworld hums softly, gently guiding you toward sleep, where Hades' whispers, memories, and quiet attentiveness accompany you into a night of deep, serene dreaming. Sweet dreams.